Joining us now is MS Now's Ali Vitale reporting on Capitol Hill. Barbara Starr is former Pentagon correspondent and author of Barbara Starr Reports on Substack. Retired U.S. Army Colonel Jack Jacobs, Medal of Honor recipient and MS Now military analyst, joins me here in studio. Ali, what else did we hear today?
Well, this was a hearing, as you mentioned, Chris, that was supposed to be about the 2027 budget request, which includes a massive plus-up for defense and military spending. And yet we have seen a substantial amount of time dedicated by members from both parties, mind you, when it comes to the forced resignation of General George, as well as the larger atmosphere that Hegseth has created at the Pentagon. When it comes to General George, though, I just want you to listen to what some members, again, of both parties said during this hearing. Watch.
I just want the record to reflect how much we regret, I personally regret at least, he's no longer in active service. He's a real loss to us, in my opinion.
I, too, regret the fact and the conditions that he left the service, and I think that our country will regret that circumstance.
I was really very upset and disturbed at how summarily he was dismissed. And that, I just think that was really handled very, very poorly.
And so, of course, you hear members there lamenting his departure, both the way in which it happened, but then also the landscape within which it happened. Certainly, Barbara and Colonel Jack can talk more about this, but Hegseth has had several moments of inflection points during his tenure atop the Pentagon, blocking promotions largely for African Americans and women within the apparatus. And then, of course, the larger question of why are you making these kinds of high-level departures and forced resignations during the ongoing war with Iran? Of course, that was also a topic of discussion during Driscoll's time in front of this subcommittee. And there's a large question here on Capitol Hill about what the cost of that war is. And then, of course, what the supplemental funding ask is going to be on the part of this administration. It's budget season, so it makes a lot of sense for us to be asking about the dollars and cents behind these foreign policy moves, in addition to, of course, Chris, the questions about the foreign policy moves themselves and exactly how much longer they're going to last.
Okay, thank you for that. Barbara, what are you hearing right now about the mood inside the Pentagon?
Well, I think it's fairly grim because, frankly, nobody knows what morning they wake up and may not have a job because Hegseth says you're fired. None of these people, we're up to several senior officers that he has summarily dismissed, and there's no accusations of any wrongdoing against them or that they weren't doing their jobs properly. The statistics will show a fair number of women and black African-American senior officers, and he just doesn't want them there anymore. And I think that everyone is holding their breath to see if he tries to do the same thing with Driscoll, the civilian head of the Army. They are open adversaries, to say the least, at the Pentagon, because Driscoll has been talked about as a successor to Hegseth, and that drives Hegseth crazy, of course. But Driscoll has something in his back pocket. He is close to Vice President J.D. Vance, and it's not at all clear Hegseth would have the chops to get rid of him at this point.
Look, Jack, I don't need to tell you that a little bit of drama inside the military isn't necessarily something completely new. But when you're looking at this kind of internal fight on the heels of summarily firing someone who, by most accounts, is very competent and whose loss is a loss for the country, what does that do?
Well, it's not helpful, I can tell you that. This is like a long-running soap opera. And it's been weighing on the Pentagon for some time. It was clear from the very beginning that Hegseth wanted to get rid of Randy George, General George, because he'd been close to Lloyd Austin, the previous Secretary of Defense, who's not a favorite of this president. Secretary Driscoll had done a very good job of insulating General George, who, by the way, done some great things in the Army, focusing our attention on getting more ammunition, for example, which is vitally important in the middle of a war or any other time, deciding how we're going to use drones and defend against drones and all the rest of the modern battlefield problems that are besetting troops in the open. did a great job and now gone. It's not helpful for morale, not at the bottom of the food chain, but certainly at the top, where all the plans are constructed and executed and so on. It makes for extremely difficult times for the military establishment at a difficult time in the United States. It remains to be seen what's going to happen next. Barbara was, I like what Barbara said when she said that the relationship between Hegseth and Driscoll goes beyond just what I was talking about. Hegseth's, I think, principal spokesman, from what I understand, would desperately love to have Driscoll's job. But Driscoll at the moment is insulated. He's very close to J.D. Vance. They went to law school together. This is, I said, a soap opera. We'll be back again talking about it soon.
Oh, boy. And then, Barbara, I want to go back for a second, if I can, to something you and Allie both brought up, which is other firings and lack of promotions. The Secretary Hegseth blocking the promotion of 4 Army officers to be one-star general. And some senior military officials questioned whether they were being singled out because of race or gender. 2 are black, 2 are women. So we looked at the DoD demographics from 2024, the last report we could find. 32% of active duty military members are racial minorities. Nearly 18% are women. How damaging inside the ranks is even the perception, although some people would say the reality, that promotions, firings depend on your sex and your race?
Well, the fact, I think, that we're asking that question, the question itself is completely appropriate and must be asked. But the fact that this has become an issue is the big problem in and of itself, because the military is supposed to be blind, not take into account someone's gender, someone's race, someone's religion. And of course, we're now seeing Secretary Hegseth very much take an unprecedented official stand to bring his own personal religious faith to the podium. Of course, he's completely entitled to his own faith, but to put it in the official context when he stands at the podium to talk about this religious issue, these are things that do not do the military any big favor, frankly. The military exists so that everyone is essentially on that equal footing, short of their rank, of course, because everyone can be called into battle. Everyone can be called to do their job under extreme duress. And no one is supposed to be favored. Hegseth doesn't really seem to be going down that road.
In a press conference this morning, the secretary took aim at the press over its coverage of the war. Not new, but listen to what he said.
I just can't help but notice the endless stream of garbage, the relentlessly negative coverage. You cannot resist peddling, despite the historic and important success of this effort and the success of our troops. Sometimes it's hard to figure out what side some of you are actually on. It's incredibly unpatriotic. Your politically motivated animus for President Trump nearly completely blinds you from the brilliance of our American warriors.
I want to get a quick reaction from both Jack and Barbara, but Barbara, let me start with you because you have covered the Pentagon for decades. Again, not new rhetoric from Hegseth, but is it reaching some kind of new level?
Well, it's interesting that he literally attacks the news media with increasing insults and aggressiveness in, I would say, in every public appearance. Clearly with the agreement of President Trump, or he wouldn't be doing it, possibly to try and turn public opinion about the war in Iran. And if that's the case, he is an abysmal failure because public sentiment about the war in Iran has not shifted by any account of any reliable polling, even though Hegseth keeps going on about all this. I guess my answer to all of this is the Secretary of Defense may wish to reacquaint himself with the words in the First Amendment and reacquaint himself with his own oath of office. The press corps is not going away. The press corps will continue to do its job, and it will continue to report the news.
I'm remembering back in the war for which you won the Medal of Honor, Jack, that there was arguably the best television news anchor that ever lived, Walter Cronkite, and every night he showed for day after day after day pictures of people who had been lost in that war. I suppose that might be considered unpatriotic. It depends on what your definition of patriotism is. If being truthful is unpatriotic, if reporting on what you see and know to be true is unpatriotic. I wonder how you view what you see from Hegseth. Is it meant as a distraction? What is happening here?
Well, you know, Walter Cronkite was accused, when he told the truth, of being unpatriotic. Yeah. But the people of the United States were behind him, as it transpired, because the truth always well, not always, almost always wins out, but certainly wins out in the end. Times have changed. You have different people at the top at the moment. And to the extent that they get away with it, people in positions of authority and responsibility can say anything and do anything they wish. And they will continue doing it as long as people let them do it. It's not very good for national security. It's not particularly good for morale. It seems sometimes that our own efforts using the military instrument of power is fragmented because the leadership itself is fragmented. That needs to change, but it's not going to change until the people change or their attitudes change. And we don't see that happening anytime soon, do we?